Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I should note first of all today that I'll be splitting my time in this speech. 3 weeks ago today, the Government's Minister of Finance delivered Canada's budget for this fiscal year. What we're debating today is the Budget Implementation Act. In this Parliament, it has been given the title C-69. That's a vile title. The last Parliament that lasted long enough to get to 69 government bills was the 42nd Parliament, this government's first Parliament. It's been downhill ever since, and this Liberal government thrives on divide and conquer misinformation narratives in order to keep Canadians unfocused on how much worse this country's prospects have become after 9 years of this aimless management. I say aimless benevolently, as if this Prime Minister and his flock don't actually know the harm they are causing the economy in the country. But I worry that it's much worse than that. I worry that Canada, being the first post-nation state, means we dismantle all that Canada has stood for, all that Canadians value in their institutions, and all that new Canadians strive to be part of as they seek to build a new life in this once great nation. After 9 years, we are far less than we have been. Our economy is the sick child of the G7. Our international standing in the world has suffered greatly. Our friends no longer see us as a dependable ally. Our military is limping along, and we continue to underfund our capabilities in what is clearly becoming a more dangerous, less secure world. The world is now seeing more conflict than it has seen since the end of the Second World War, almost 80 years ago. This government remains oblivious to what's on the horizon because it can tend to navel gaze and mislead Canadians about where we actually stand in the world. Bill C-69 still has a clang to it that has crystallized what has been misguided about this government from its outset. The last C-69 from 6 years ago was successfully challenged all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, where finally the constitutionally offensive parts of the legislation were overruled. But that was a legal journey that took years, as if it couldn't be foreseen and avoided. Years of divisiveness in this country, years of project delays, years of holding back tax-paying sectors of Canada's economy while shoveling money out the door to well-connected insiders, years of economic destruction, years of watching our closest competitors move forward in a rapidly changing world while Canada's opportunities were held back, years of this government feeding propagandists billions of taxpayer dollars to trumpet their recycled narrative to no benefit for the country, but much benefit to the pockets of connected insiders. The previous C-69 was a vile affront like no other, and this one can only pale in comparison. Budget 2024, as delivered, was a 416-page document with lots of back-padding and nonsensical narratives, plus a 74-page supplement. It was entitled Fairness for Every Generation. What a great marketing slogan, because excessive overspending will affect every Canadian equally badly. But I would caution that it is particularly bad for young Canadians, those that are being saddled with paying for the cost of $1.3 trillion of Canadian debt and growing with no end in sight. How do we tell new Canadians or those entering the workforce that, congratulations, you are now inheriting your share of debt for money that was thrown away by a spendy government that knew nothing about fiscal management? $30,000 per head, in addition to the provincial debt that in many cases doubles that number, in addition to mortgage debt if you're lucky enough to own a home, in addition to your student debt and your consumer debt and your auto debt payments. Is it any wonder that Canadians are considered some of the most indebted people in the world? And I've been clear in this House many times that the metric this government tries to use, debt to GDP, is neither comparatively useful nor is it, in fact, honest, because it tries to recollect the amounts that Canadians have had deducted from their paychecks specifically for their retirements, both in the Canada Pension Plan and in the Quebec Pension Plan, and pretend that those amounts, over $800 billion, should be used as collateral for this government. It doesn't work that way elsewhere, but this government is content to mislead Canadians that they can use it in their justification of showing financial prudence. It's dishonest. If the government's backup plan for maintaining fiscal stability in the future is to take back, I should say, steal back the funds Canadians believe belongs to them, independently managed for their retirement, then I should say, tell that to them directly. The Minister of Finance should directly say, Canadian workers, your pension earnings are our collateral, used to capitalize our overspending. This Budget Implementation Act that we are debating takes what was in that nearly 490 pages of budget information and puts it into legislative format. 660 pages of legislative changes to be addressed, debated, and voted upon an omnibus bill. It would be interesting if it had much to do with the budget, but as always, it's a mishmash of legislative changes, much of which have absolutely nothing to do with the 490 pages presented in this House of Commons 3 weeks ago. But I was really looking for the parts of it that were relevant to young Canadians that are trying to buy a home or trying to rent a home in a rising housing market with stagnant salaries, while inflation is making their purchasing power for food, rent, clothing, heat, light, education, the basics, more challenging. The budget was presented with much fanfare. It's called Fairness for Every Generation. But the government seized on the problem being felt most acutely by Canadians, particularly young Canadians, and presented an array of programming to address the real issue of housing, the inability to house Canadians. The cost of buying a house has doubled under this government's watch. The cost of renting a home has doubled under this government's watch. Has take-home pay doubled? Absolutely not. As a result, the ratio of housing prices and rent to income has doubled in these past 9 years. Housing isn't just twice as expensive. The ability to fund your home now takes twice the percentage of your take-home pay. Canada's economy has withered in relation to our peers. Nothing gets done in this country unless government writes someone a check to do it. Please set up business here with taxpayer money, and it will pay $4 million to $5 million per job provided, as long as it's in the right area or what they think is the right industry. Flavor of the day stuff, chasing what everyone else is chasing, risky business. Taxpayer-funded corporate welfare and funds that will never be recouped in the economy. I counted the number of initiatives this government would take to alleviate housing concerns. Remember, the most resonant concern to the public, and there were 53 measures to address housing: building, financing, mortgaging, targeting, bribing, pontificating. And then I went through the 660-page bill, and I found 2 points that were relevant to housing. The first is the increase in the home buyer's plan, withdrawal plan limit from $35,000 to $60,000. I'd like to see the size of that target market. A Canadian who has over $60,000 in their RSP and doesn't have a home, definitely not the financial makeup of the great majority of Canadians who have found themselves squeezed out of Canada's housing market. The second measure allows the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation to increase their mortgage default insurance limit from $750 billion to $800 billion. Now remember, that $750 billion was temporarily increased from $600 billion in 2020 to deal with the effects of the pandemic long past. I suppose some temporary effects last longer than others. This is $800 billion of risk that the government bears for mortgages in Canada. That's in addition to the almost $1.3 trillion in debt the Government of Canada owes money managers around the world, or the $350 billion of liabilities at the Bank of Canada. Canada's federal government debt payments now total $54 billion a year. That's more than this government spends on health care. That's more than Canadians pay through the GST. The issue with housing is a cautionary tale. Housing should be a sound investment, one that holds its value over time, especially if the homeowner provides the proper upkeep, a store of value for years when income will be lower. It's a savings plan and is a contrast to paying rent, where your payments will always rise with inflation and the value accumulated is paid to someone else. Sometimes that makes sense, but most Canadians benefit from owning a home. Madam Speaker, how much longer do I have? Let me finish up here, Madam Speaker. For the sake of young Canadians that hope one day to raise their families in homes like their parents did or like they anticipated when they moved to Canada, let me advise the government. Listen to all the voices that are telling you this, including the Bank of Canada governor. Get the budget balance back. Stop causing inflation. Let the economy grow and stop punishing sectors that are not your chosen sectors. Thank you, Madam Speaker.